Good evening. Jersey's Legislation Committee want to make sure crime doesn't pay by confiscating the proceeds of criminal activity and putting them into general revenues. This already happens with the proceeds from drug trafficking. Money confiscated from drugs dealers is put into the Seized Assets Fund and then ploughed back into fighting the war against drugs. Graham Satchell reports.
Crime pays. Even if you're convicted and go to prison, there is nothing in law to stop you reaping the benefits when you get out.
I think we're envisaging more serious crimes where, for example, crimes of blackmail or undue influence, where people can benefit from criminal activities. Then I think it is socially right that the proceeds of that crime should be confiscated and held for the public good.
This already happens with the proceeds of drug trafficking. In 1988, the state set up the Seized Assets Fund. All monies accrued from trafficking and dealing go into the fund. At the end of last year, it held £67,000. That money is now being used to fight the drugs war.
We in Jersey believe that reducing the demand for drugs is equally important, if not more important, to reducing the supply. As long as there is a demand, the supply will be there. So the committee managing this fund decided that the largest chunk of the money will in fact go to the education service to improve drugs education within the education service in Jersey.
Earlier this year, money from the fund was distributed for the first time. The police received £10,000, Customs got £15,000 for new technical equipment, and the Education Department received £27,500 to help teach young people about the dangers of drug abuse. Jim Hollywood believes the money confiscated from criminals should be used to fight crime, in the same way that money confiscated from drug traffickers is used to fight drugs.
I can see great merit in that, and provided that is possible, I'm sure the Legislation Committee would support that proposal. But it is not something, as I say, as yet we have considered.
The case against 23-year-old Guernsey computer programmer Geoffrey Petty, who's charged with committing an act of gross indecency with a 5-year-old child, was adjourned today while social inquiry reports are prepared. Petty has pleaded guilty to the charge, which took place in 1987. He'll appear in court again on the 7th of September. Jersey's Attorney General has decided that there is not sufficient evidence for the Constable of St Helier, Mr Bob LeBrock, to be charged with assault. Last month, Jersey police investigated when the constable is said to have tried to stop a 13-year-old cyclist riding a bicycle in the pedestrian precinct. The cyclist ended on the ground with grazing to her knee, elbow and hip. Jersey's bailiff, Sir Peter Krill, is to consider a report on whether Mark Newell should remain as executor of his parents' will. And if the bailiff decides there should be a hearing to decide the issue, Mark Newell is likely to be summoned to the Royal Court, along with all the other interested parties.
On Monday, as Roderick Newell was sentenced to life imprisonment for his parents' murder, and his younger brother Mark was given a 6-year sentence for helping to bury the bodies and cover up the crime, the bailiff Sir Peter Krill told Mark he'd lied to the court on oath. He was referring to a hearing back in 1991, when, after hearing evidence from Mark, the Royal Court declared that Nicholas and Elizabeth Newell could be presumed dead. Shortly afterwards, Mark Newell applied for a grant of probate to become the executor of his parents' will. Now, the judicial greffier, Mr Ian Lamarcon, has written a report for the bailiff, which he says outlines the facts so that the court can decide whether it's appropriate for Mark to remain as executor. As executor, it would currently be Mark's decision as to where his parents are buried, once their bodies are released by the Viscount at the conclusion of an inquest. But the brothers' uncle, Stephen Newell, and their aunt, Nancy Clark, both want the bodies of Nicholas and Elizabeth to be buried in their native Scotland.
Former centenaire Phil Rondell is to stand for the vacant deputy seat in the parish of St John, following Carl Hinno's election as constable of the parish last week. Mr Rondell's decision means that an election for deputy looks increasingly likely. Former Constable John Le Sueur, who is currently on holiday, has indicated he may too also stand.
Mr Rondell says he was asked to stand by a large number of parishioners following the constable's election. The 48-year-old businessman believes St John's reputation has been tarnished by recent events. He wants to return the parish to the sleepy backwater it used to be.
St John's have been in the forefront of many things for many years now, due to the high profile of our Conitop. And things hopefully now might change and drop back a little.
So it's a case of parish before personality?
As far as I'm concerned, I want to represent the parish of St John's. Personalities don't come into it.
Last week, the parishioners of St John revealed they remain firmly behind Carl Hinno and John Le Sueur. But Mr Rondell's decision to stand shows that support is far from unanimous. If John Le Sueur decides to stand for deputy, the political controversy that has gripped this parish for the last few weeks looks set to continue.
Guernsey's Lisa Opie, one of the world's finest squash players, retired from the international game earlier this year at the age of 30. Lisa is now limiting her activities to domestic league games and some coaching. She's home in Guernsey this month, helping out in a Squash Rackets Association summer school.
Imagine that squash is your game and you have the chance to be personally coached by former British champion Lisa Opie. Well, for nearly 20 British youngsters, many of them from Guernsey, that chance has come their way. While some of these young players are in their ascendancy, it is in some ways a sad time for the Guernsey star. With her playing days numbered, she now faces a new role in squash, and one of them is coaching.
I played my last tournament in June in Japan, the JSM tournament, and I finished off playing my old rival Vicky Cardwell. It was quite an interesting match there.
Got yourself a lot of publicity.
I did, yeah. I think the press have paid Vicky to wind me up.
But you are still playing competitively?
Yeah, I'll still play sort of league matches, maybe Bundesliga in Germany, French league if it crops up, and a few exhibition matches here and there. We'll have an exhibition match in Jersey just before the World Championships. It's sort of Guernsey versus Australia.
What is you and
Martine
yeah.
Versus Liz Irving and Michelle Martin, which should be interesting because I think Australia are obviously favourites for the World Team event. So Martine may be in the English team, but I obviously won't be. So it'll be quite an interesting match.
So what's happening? Is coaching now taking over?
I'd always said I'd never do any coaching, and I've ended up coming here and doing a summer school. But I don't think I could be base myself at a club and be a club coach. But organising squads, sort of under 16, under 19 squad trainings and things like this summer school. We've brought 6 or 8 kids over from England, and they've joined up with the local players. And the local players are hosting them, and they join in free with the coaching.
But on the brighter side, Lisa does get to meet some of the sport's promising youngsters. And she believes that some of tomorrow's stars could again come from Guernsey.
There's some really good players. For a while, there wasn't much talent around, and suddenly there's a few popped up. There's Adam Shields, who's #1. He did a few demonstrations with me, and he's #1 junior over here. He's very talented. John Lelever, who's moved over here in the last year, is starting to coach him, and he's sort of grown a foot since I've last saw him, and he's really improved. And there's also a girl, Kelly Conway, who's related to Mark Roberts, so she's very talented. She beat me in a 100-metre sprint on the track yesterday, so I'm not very happy. I'm a bit stiff today.
Any tinges of sadness about stepping down?
Not, I mean, obviously at the time, I retired at the British Open, and then I played my last tournament in Japan, and they had a little party and presentation. I was a bit tearful there at the time, but I really haven't missed playing at all since. I think my body just needed a big rest.
Lisa, like her fellow islander and former world champion Martine Lemoynian, learned her game in Guernsey thanks to the coaching of Reg Harbour. Although Lisa won't be playing, she will be back in Guernsey with Martine for the World Championships. So who's going to win?
The favourites for the individual, obviously, has got to be Michelle Martin, the Australian. Sort of English hopes would be Cassie and Martine, obviously, being in Guernsey. She's got her best chance, really. And yeah, Liz Irving. She's world #2 at the moment. She's never won a major event. She keeps losing in finals, so it's a good chance for her.
So the international sport's looking good despite the loss of Lisa Opie?
I think so. Well, it's not so colourful as the press put it in Japan.